تعنا هذا اللي خميت علو خميت حضره استفاد على عالم زلهم تجارو ما كي يتملس اللهنا واستديو لما عنتون بحد شارستي خنزر عربينا متنقطع نوبل كوميتين أبي أحمد بزول الرئيس خنزر عربينا بزلوا أبديتاتون زاربكم بيستخدم علامات لما عنتي حسرت 4 أيام وعرفت تشحن 20 كلتن في أوروبا وأنا قطع صار ريو إذا برنامج زيكم دخلوا زين جورو شير إن سبسكرايب أنت غيركنا عاوي متابع عندك فينيو بمغزال لما عندي تجراي وج خبز تجمر له 430 شوعة معلتات كوينه له تجراي جينوسايد 430 شوعة معلتات أو كل سوشيال ميديا ذات هاشتاغنا جورنا زم international organizational tagna gawarna ያው ቃልስና በሶሻል ሚዲያ ንቀጽል ማለት እዩ እንደገና ከም ዝበልክዎ ጽናዓት ሚዲያ ፌስቡክ ኣብ ኢንስታግራም ኣብ ትዊተር ኣብ ዩቲዩብ ሕጅ መጽና ኣለና ዩቲዩብ ቻናልና ታምስ አፕ ሰብስክራይብ ዝብል ምልክት ጸቀይትኩም ቤተሰብ ሆኑ ጆይን ግበሩ እንሰርሕ ፕሮግራማታት ወን ያው ይሐልፈኩም ማለት እዩ ያው ከም ዝበልኩኹም ቅድሚ ናብቲ ፕሮግራም ታወይ ሓሳባት ተልዩኩም ኣብ ትሕቲ ዘሎ ቴሌፎን ቁጽሪ ቫይበር እና ዋትስኣፕ او ጽሕፉ ኮንታክት ትገብሩ ወይንም ከዓነይ ፓርቲሲፔት ትገብሩ ትኽእሉ ኢኹም ቅድሚ ናብቲ ፕሮግራም እታና ሰብውን ስካዕዛቱ ሓንቲ ሙዚቃ ክጋብዘኩም እሞ ኢንሳይድ ስቶሪ አልጀዚራ ዝናይ ትግራይ ሰራሓላ ንኽትሪእዋ ሪኮመንድ ይገብረኩም ኣብ ዩቲዩብ ወነላ 29 ደቂቃ እዩ ሙሉእ ፕሮግራም ያው ኣብዚ ከሪእኩም ይክእልን እዩ ግን ያው ዝተወሰነ ከሪእኩም እዩ ንስኻትኩም ያው ኣቲኹም ትከታተልዋ ማለት እዩ እና ከመይ ቢልና ናይ በዓልትና ጥቕሚ ንጥቀመላ ንኽእል ታ ቪድዮ ብዝበለጸ ረአይዋ ሞ ካብኡ ሼር እውን ንገበርኩም እንደገና ከዓነይ ኣብ ትዊተር እውን ንሰዓታሽ ጌርካ ፎርዋርድ ምግባር ይካል እዩ ማለት እዩ ትዊት ምግባር ይካል እዩ እስቲ ሙዚቃ ጋብዘኩም ሞ ካብኡ መለስ እየ
Ethiopia frees Tigrayan rebel leaders to promote a national dialogue on ending the war. But government airstrikes continue to kill dozens. So, how genuine is the Prime Minister's offer of a peaceful solution? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoum. Ethiopia's government appears to be offering an olive branch to end more than a year of conflict in the northern Tigray region. It's releasing several high-profile political prisoners as part of an amnesty for Orthodox Christmas. Those pardoned include leaders and founders of the rebel Tigray People's Liberation Front. Prime Minister Ahmed says this will pave the way for a national dialogue for lasting peace. The UN and EU have welcomed their release, but some government critics called it a publicity stunt. Criticisms increased after the latest government airstrike killed at least 56 internally displaced people near the Eritrean border. Many children were wounded, according to aid workers. Ethiopia's government denies targeting civilians and blocking aid convoys. The war has created one of the worst humanitarian crises in the Horn of Africa. We'll begin our discussion in a moment. First, let's bring you up to speed on the latest developments. The Ethiopian government has been making steady territorial gains in recent weeks, most notably a string of towns and villages, including a UNESCO heritage sites in Lalibela. Last month, the leader of the TPLF wrote to the UN Secretary General. He announced his fighters would withdraw from the neighboring regions of Amhara and Afar as a condition of possible peace talks. The UN Human Rights Council is investigating allegations of widespread rights abuse, including illegal detention, torture, and sexual abuse. And there's been growing international pressure on Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to end the fighting. The outgoing U.S. envoy met Abiy on Friday, shortly before the pardons were announced. All right, let's bring in our guests in London. Awol Allo, senior lecturer in law at Kiel University. In Oslo, Kjetil Tronvoll, professor of peace and conflict studies at Oslo New University College. And in The Hague, Adam Kassé Abebe, program officer at the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Welcome to the program. We contacted ministers and spokespeople from the Ethiopian government, but they didn't respond to our interview requests. Adam, let me start with you today. This airstrike came just a day after the government announced that high-profile political prisoners would be pardoned and released. That was to include some leaders of the TPLF. What kind of message does it send to announce pardons and releases one day and then conduct an airstrike the day after?
Thank you very much for having me again. You're right, there has been reports of airstrikes and significant casualties. The government hasn't confirmed or denied it. But overall, I think the airstrikes, the several airstrikes that we've seen in the past couple of days are not going to deliver anything that a war of 14 months have not been able to deliver. And so it is really, in my opinion, not needed, not necessary, especially at a moment where there seems to be a real gesture of peace towards peace.
Well, let me ask you, under what conditions are these prisoners being released? First of all, do we know if they actually have been released yet? And once they are, or once they have been, will they have to be under house arrest? Will they be able to speak up or speak out? What are the conditions they might be faced with?
Thank you. So the Attorney General basically dropped the charges against these prisoners. So the prisoners have not been convicted. The charges were dropped. The justification provided by the government is that this is an important and necessary step to expand the scope of the national dialogue process that the government is promising the Ethiopian people. So I saw this as a really important and positive step, not just because we have individuals who have not been imprisoned in the first place freed, but also because of this promise of a comprehensive national dialogue process that will help Ethiopia solve this long-standing political problem and lead to some kind of political settlement. But the problem, of course, is that you still have significant number of individuals in prison, including leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front, which is a major political party in the Oromia region. We have still an armed conflict ongoing, including the drone attacks you just mentioned, a major humanitarian crisis, not just in Tigray. The situation in Tigray is unique, but in other regions as well, in Oromia, in Amhara, in the Afar region, you have a deepening polarization, which makes it very difficult for a national dialogue process to work. So primary responsibility lies with the government to create the conditions necessary for a credible, inclusive national dialogue process. But I think the steps that have been taken so far, the release of prisoners, is a good thing, and I think we should recognize it as such.
Kjetil, do we know at this point who has been released? Do we know more about these political prisoners who've been pardoned? And do any of them pose any kind of political danger to Abiy Ahmed going forward?
Yes, the list of names of the individuals released have been made public. And just need to add to Awol's explanation, Attorney General Gedeon distinguished between two categories of released. The people belonging to the Oromo Federalist Congress and the Balderas were released due to help facilitate the political dialogue process moving forward. The prisoners belonging to the TPLF party were released due to their old age and health condition on a humanistic reasoning. So it is clear from the government side that they distinguish between the categories of prisoners released. And I think this is basically, as stressed, an indication of trying to facilitate a political dialogue in Ethiopia by including cherry-picking certain opposition parties they want to take part. Of course, the most significant ones are the release of Jawar Mohammed and Bekele Garba, the leadership of the Oromo Federalist Congress, which really pose a direct electoral threat to the current government. But this is not aimed at a peace negotiation process to the armed actors of TDF and OLA. And the government is sending out mixed signals in this regard. They are continuing the bombing, they're continuing the ground war, and they're continuing also very hostile rhetoric. If you read the recent couple of days statements by the Prime Minister's office. So we need to keep two topics in mind at the same time. Yes, it is positive that the government is aiming to, what can I say, broaden the democratic civil space in the country. But the real problem is the civil war, which is wreaking havoc in the northern parts of Ethiopia and in west in Oromia.
Adam Ketil there was talking about these mixed messages that he says are going on when it comes to the government. On the one hand, you have the release of these prisoners and you have talk of a dialogue. And then on the other hand, you have these airstrikes that have happened. Have we heard anything from the government about these airstrikes? Has there been any information shared by the government about them?
No, I certainly haven't seen any, but there is two kinds of reports. The first, indeed, is the aerial attacks that apparently have killed a lot of civilians as well. And there's a second part, which is that TPLF fighters are actually engaging in a counter-offensive in some parts of the border areas with Amhara, especially the Raya area. So there is a significant, indeed, trouble. There is still tension that is lying that can disrupt any progress towards peace. At the same time, I think these are important steps that have been taken. And we should also wait and see as the government then unveils a strategy towards peace. As Turnbull said, there is a fundamental need for a peace process that then enables the success of the dialogue. So there is indeed mixed signals, but I think we haven't had any time really to process what has happened, and other measures would have to be unveiled. But I think there is a genuine indication of accepting that war is not going to solve the problems, that there has to be some kind of process, some kind of negotiation. But in terms of how exactly that will be designed, what will be the strategies, what will be the outcomes that the government seeks to see, that I think would take some time before it emerges. And we've also to remember that this is not an easy decision. It's a very, very difficult, very controversial decision. A lot of people have expressed their anger, their frustration for several reasons. One is, of course, the desire to see justice. There has been so much suffering since the war started, and actually even before that, that people want justice. People want to see somebody held accountable. So that is very important. And secondly, and I think perhaps more fundamentally, a lot of people have very little trust, very little confidence in the government. There's a critical mass, a critical segment of society that doesn't have confidence in the government. And so it's not just, these points of disagreement, these episodes of disagreement are an indication of a fundamental problem of lack of confidence, partly because, especially after the June invasion, the TPLF invasion of Afar and Amhara regions, people felt they have been lied to, that they have been exposed to brutalities that they didn't imagine. Even as the government was telling them that they had a strategy, that nothing of an invasion or anything would happen. And so the government would have to work really hard, one, to assure people that they will not be exposed to any danger, especially people in Amhara and Afar that are close to the fire. So I think there has to be significant assurance and also taking serious measures towards peace to reduce the risk of a potential escalation of the conflict.
I'd like to ask you, from your vantage point, just how genuine is the Prime Minister's offer of a peaceful solution right now?
I think it is, in the face of the very brutal and traumatizing experience that Ethiopia had over the last year and a half, and significant transformation in the political landscape, primarily because of the decisions that the Prime Minister has taken, it is very difficult at this point to trust the Prime Minister and his government. I mean, a national dialogue process in a country like Ethiopia, with a contested, very complex history, with contrasting visions of the future where major political actors disagree on the kind of country and the kind of people that they want to be going forward. It is very difficult to see how a national dialogue process that is not genuine, that's not credible, that's not inclusive, would help solve this country's problem. Now, the government's public position so far is that those who are engaged in an armed conflict will not be part of the national dialogue process, namely the Tigray Defense Forces or Oromo Liberation Army. These are groups with significant constituencies behind them. A national dialogue process that doesn't include these forces cannot be an inclusive national dialogue process. It cannot hope to solve Ethiopia's foundational, long-standing problem. the only way this country can move forward is if all stakeholders on all sides are prepared to make that painful compromise that is necessary. This is a country with significant divergence in terms of what people want. No one can get everything that they want in a country like Ethiopia, but it is important, taking the existing constitution as a starting point, to find a solution for the crisis that has been stabilizing the country. But we need to see a lot more from the government and the prime minister in terms of making those painful concessions, compromises. And as I said at the beginning, primary responsibility lies with the prime minister and his government to create the conditions for that kind of dialogue that would ultimately lead the country to a more durable, sustainable future.
Kietil, I saw you nodding along to a lot of what Awal was saying there, so I want to ask you what your reaction is, but also I want to ask you, from your point of view, what has to happen for a national dialogue process to be a success?
Well, I think the sequencing here is important. A national dialogue process to create a durable new political configuration, so to say, of Ethiopia need to include all parties. The parties which are really challenging the Ethiopian statehood, you can say, are the TDF and OLA today, and a number of other smaller armed groups. So they start in the wrong end. The peace negotiations need to take place first, or rather a cessation of hostilities agreement need to be on the table first, and then you can start to think about an all-inclusive political dialogue process moving forward. But as of today, the government still considers TDF, OLA, and the other fighting units as terrorist organizations, which they will not negotiate with. And so in that regard, a national dialogue will be mute, so to say, or not relevant to the key issues challenging Ethiopia, which is the civil war. And again, it goes back to the constitutional framework. It goes back to the key issues of what Ethiopia is and how Ethiopia should be organized to accommodate the diversity of its people. And here is the core problem. And I think, first of all, the political context, the political environments need to be a civil environment. It cannot be an environment in war and at the same time conduct political dialogue.
Adam, in your previous answer, you touched on just how difficult things are for people in Ethiopia as a result of this conflict. So I want to ask you a little bit about the humanitarian dimension of all this. I mean, we've heard again and again over the past year just how dire the humanitarian crisis is that is unfolding in Ethiopia. From what you know about what's going on, how difficult has the situation become? Just how dire is it for civilians?
Thank you very much. A quick note to what Tronvor said. He is right that we have to find a way, a solution to the crisis that is engulfing Ethiopia. And without finding a peaceful solution to the problems, it's very difficult to have the conditions for genuine inclusive dialogue that the country needs. At the same time, we should not think only in linear terms. So sequencing, the idea of sequencing is not necessarily very relevant. I think both can go hand in hand, but indeed the priority should be to stop to silence the
ኢንተረስቲንግ ዝኾነ ዲስከሽን እዩ ነይሩ እታ ምልእታ ቪድዮ ረአይዋ ብጣዕሚ ጽቡቕ እዩ ንጥቀመላ ብዙሕ ነገራት እውን ኣሎ ሰዓት ይኸድ ስለ ዘሎ ናብ ናይ ሎማዓንቲ ፕሮግራም ኢና ንኸይድ ከም ትፈልጥዎ ኖቤል ፕራይስ 2019 ብፈረንጅ ኣቆጻጽራ ማለት እዩ ምስ ኤርትራ ዝነበረ ሽግር ብሰላም ብምፍታሕን ነቲ ተጀሚሩ ዝነበረ ናይ ሰላም ስምምዕነት ንብዙሕ ዓመታት ዝጸንሐ ኣይ ሰላም ኣይ ውግእ ዝነበረን ንዘንክል ተዓድታት ያው ዘይተፈተሐ ዝነበረ ሽግር ንኽፈትሕ ብምምካሩን ንጽቡቕ ጅምርን ኢንካሬጅ ንምግባር እዩ ኖቤል ሂቦምዎ ያው እቲ ናይ ኖቤል ወሃባ ከዓነይ ከም ትፈልጥዎ ብሳይንስ ብቴክኖሎጂ ብኬሚስትሪ ብሰላም ብብዙሕ ኣንፈታት እዩ ዘለና ብናይ ሰላም እዩ ተሸሊሙ እቲ ታሪኻዊ ባክግራውንድ ናይ ኖቤል ፕራይዝ እንተሪኢኹምዎ ሓደ ግዜ ዝተወሃበ ሽልማት ኣይምለስን እዩ ሓደ ግዜ እንተተሸሊምካ እቲ ድርጅት ክስርዝን ወይንም ከዓነይ ሪቫይዝ ክግበርን ይከኣልን እዩ ዋላ ትኽክል ይኹን ወላ ትኽክል ኣይኹንና ብጣዕሚ ብዙሓት ዝኾኑ ናይ ኢንተርናሽናል ኦርጋናይዜሽናት ትራቨል ዝናይ ሕጂ ዝዛረብ ነበረ ዝናይ ኖርዌይ ፕሮፌሰር ንባዕሉ ብዙሕ ክሪቲሲዝም ቅድሚ ሕዚ ተዛሪቡ እዩ ኣብ ኣልጀዚራ ማለት እዩ ኖቤል ፕራይዝ ሲ ንዘይግብኦ ሰብ ወይንም ከዓነይ ትኽክለኛ ዘይኮነ ሰብ እዩ ተባሂሉ ማለት እዩ ናስ ከዓ መልሰይ ነበረን ሕጂ ግን ትወፅኡ ዘሎ ትዝግበር ዘሎ ነገራት ኦሬዲ ያው ይርድእዎ እዮም ኢለ ዝኣምን ግን ምንም ክገብሮ ይኽእልን ክቕየረ ይኽእልን ኦሬዲ ዝተወሃበ ሽልማት ዝተወሃበ ገንዘብ ካብቲ ገንዘብ ንዓቐብ ከዓነይ ተዓውይ ትዋና ቫልዩ ናይቲ እንታይ ናይቲ ሽልማት እቲ ሪኮግኒሽን እዩ ትዋጋ ዝተወሃበሉ ምኽንያት እዩ ኩሉ ግዜ እናተፀዋዕ እውን ክቕፅል እዩ ማለት እዩ ኣይ ብፅቡቕ ኣይ ብሕማቕ 2019 ኣበይ ኣሕመድ ኖቤል ከም ተወሰደ እዩ ክስታይ ክብለና ሕጂ ግን ብግልፂ ስቴትመንት ተውፅኦም ኣለዎ ኖቤል ፕራይስ ትማሊ ወፅኦም ኣለዎ እንታይ ዝብል ዘሎ ቀጥታ ክሪቲሳይዝ ክገብርዎ ኣይደለዩን ግን እንታይ ኢሎም ዘለዉ ኣብ ትግራይ ዝግበር ዘሎ ውግእን ጄኖሳይድን ወይ ሲቪል ዎር ኣብይ ኣሕመድ ቀጥታ ዝኾነ ሬስፖንሲቢሊቲ ከም ዘለዎን ጠጠው ከብሎ ከም ዘለዎን እዮም ተዛሪቦም ዘለዎ ማለት እዩ እና እዚ ብዲፕሎማሲ ኣረኣያ ዓብዪ ዝኾነ ዓወት እዩ ምክንያቱም እቲ ሽልማት ዝሃቦ ኖቤል ፕራይስ ወፂኡ ብቐጥታ ከምዚ ኢሉ ክዛረብ ንቅድሚት ንዝወስድዎ ካልእ ስጉምታት ከምዚ መጀመርያ እዩ ከምዚ መጀመርያ ወይንም ከዓኒ ኣንፈት መሃቢ እዩ ንሱ ግን ኦሬዲ ኣብይ ኣሕመድ ዝቕይሮ ነገር የለን ምክንያቱ ኖቤል ፕራይዝ ጀስት ሓደ ኦርጋናይዜሽን እዩ ንሱ ግደፍዎ እሞ ዩናይትድ ኔሽን ኣንቶኒዮ ጉቴሬስ ኣሜሪካ ዝኩሉ ዳርጋ ዓመት ሙሉእ ጠጠው ኣቢሎ ናብ ኔጎሽሽን ናዓ ተዓዲ ክትከፋፈል እምበር ብውግእ መፍትሒ ይመፅእ እናበላ መብዛሕትአን ዓድታት ናይ ኣውሮፓ ሕብረት ካብ ምጥንቃቕ እውን ሓሊፈን እስካዕ ምፍርራሕ معاقب هنجبرلكم هنا ترخوا ذلهم رداتات تقاريو ያው ምስ ኢንተርናሽናል ሞኔታሪ ፈንድ ወርልድ ባንክን ትረኽቦ ኢትዮጵያ ከምዝ ቋርጽ ያው ብዙሕ ነገራት ብዝኽእልዎ ብዲፕሎማሲ ተጽዕኖታት ክገብራ መቲነን ግን ኣይከኣለን ምክንያቱም ኣብዚ ህዝ ዘለዎ ውግእ አብይ ኣነ ዋላ እንተደልዩ ድሌት ዋላ እንተልይዎ ሲግኒፊካንት ዝኾነ ለውጥ ከምጽእ እዩ ወይንም ከዓኒ ንሱ ዝወሰኖ ውሳነታት ናብ መሬት ወሪዱ برجز عوي لو تخمزي لا أمنن مخنياتو كم تمالي صحف ونوح زوال أرتيكل نيرو فيسبوك تاريخهم عبز هذا لنا يو استفلا لي حيل تاتي تفطيرو زلوا أبي إثيوبيا مالتيو إثيوبيا نيست زبهالو إنه حزي ناي أبي بارتي وين مكعني أبي أنا برينسيبل وين أقوم يقولن أبي توانا دليتو سلطانو خمي بيلو حيزو تقصر خمس خيل ويمدي خمس ولته شعات عمتي نجوس كتكونها إلى تيا يا زغل عمته مدة صراحة صنحة تاينا جبر يومس حد زيم سونا حد زيم سجون بشعات حد زيم سجبسي تا نسو دريمز جبر أنه تكون مزخونة يكون حيلي نمسرح سجم زي ولا سبينا تأوزوا للو إمنت وين مكعني بلان وين مكعني purpose على ويلي أمنني سلزي منهم define خجوري كيل نبتخلي أنت خيرنا جن زمنا حرا حيلتات اللوزياتهم أنت يمزلوا نساتهم superior كوينهم لعلوت كوينهم زجزوا وينهم كعني بناتاتهم دليت الصحف حق منقصي ናትና እዩ ናይ ቀደም ግዛኣትና ኢሎም ብዝኣምንዎ ናይ ኢትዮጵያ ግዛኣት ቆሪጾም ወሲዶም ትናታቶም ባህልን መንነትን ቋንቋን ተጠቒሞም ከምቲ ቀደም ነበረ ማለት እዩ ቅድሚ ደርጊ ናይ ሃይለ ስላሴ ዝነበረ ስርዓት ከምኡ ዓይነት ምፍጣር እዩ ተዋና ድሌቶም ማለት እዩ እዚ ከዓኒ ካብ ትግራይ ወርቃይት ራያ ብሙሉእ ይወስድዎ መተከል ዝብልዎ ኣሎ እንደገና ናይ ኦሮምያ ልዩ ዞን ዝበሃል ከሚሴታት ብሙሉእ ጠቕሊልካ ተኾይንዎም እውን ተኾይንሎም እውን ኣዲስ ኣበባ እውን ኣብ ሸዋ እቲኻ ኣምሕርኛ ወይ ከዓኒ ናይ ኣምሕርኛ ባህልን ቅርስን ትዝውሰድ ካብ ትግራይ ትግእዚ ሃይማኖት ኩሉ ቦታታት እውን ዘይኮነስ እቲ ባህሊ እቲ ታሪክ ወሲድካ ያው ንሳቶም ሱፒሪየር ዝኾኑሉ ስርዓት ምስራሕ ማለት እዩ ንሱ ግን ጥራሕ እኹሎ ይኮነን እዩ ቻሌንጂንግ ዝገብሮም ሓይሊ ብሙሉእ በተለይ ካብ ትግራይ ዝመጽእ ሓይሊ ከይፍጠርን ከይለዓልን ጌርካ ምቃዕ ወይንም ከዓኒ ብጣዕሚ ዝተዳኸመት ተተኾይኑ እውን ሙሉእ ብሙሉእ ትግራይ ቦታ ወሲድካ ነቲ ህዝቢ ንምጥፋእ እዩ ግልጽ እዩ በዓልቶም እውን ተዛሪቦም እዮም ትድሌቶም ምስቶም ናይቲ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስተር መኸርቲ ኮይኖም ዘለዉ ንዳንኤል ክብረት ንኣንዳርጋቸው ጽጌ ንኢሳት ንብሎቶም ብግልጽ ብሚድያታቶም ዝተዛረብዎ እዮም እዚ ዝሕባእ ክሳ ኣይኮነን ንሳቶም ኣለዎ ሓደ ናይ ኦሮሞ ሓይልታት ከዓነ ኣለዎ ኦሮሞ ሓይልታት መብዛሕትኦም ግዜ ብናታቶም ኢሊታት መብዛሕትኦም ግዜ ትዝነበረ ኢንተርቴይን ዝገብርዎ ናይ ኦሮሞ ሓይልታት ፍሪ ዝኾነት ኦሮምያ ምምስራት እዩ ነይሩ ንጆሃር 50 ዓመት ዝተቃለሰሉ ሆነ ግን ካልእትን ሕጂ ቄሮ ዝበሃል ኣብይ ኣሕመድን በዓልቶም ራን ዝገብርዎ ነበሩ ብገንዘብ እናውፅኡ ምክንያቱም ስርዓት ንኸቀየርን ኣብይ ናብ ስልጣን ንኽመፅን ብድሕሪት ኮይኖም ስን ጆሃር ኮይኖም በዓልቶም ራን ይገብርዎ ነይሮም ድሓር ኣብይ እንታይ ገይሩ ብቲ ለውጢ ናይ ባዕሉ ኢንተረስት ንኸምፅእ ያው ገዲፍዎ ናቶም ጠሊሙ ዋና ናይ ምን ተላኣኻይ ኮይኑ ናይዞም ናይ ኣምሓሩ ማለት እዩ ናይ ኣምሓሩ ኣጀንዳ ክስታይልዎ በዓልቶም እውን ንኣንዳርጋቸው ጽጌ እቲ ሪፎርም ፕላን ዝሃብናዮ ንሕና ኢና ኢሎም ማለት እዩ እዚ ከዓነይ እቲ ሪፎርም ፕላን ሕወሓት ወይንም ከዓነይ ኢህአዲግ ኣሲርዎ ዝነበረ ሰብኣይ ናይ ግንቦት 7 መራሒ ዝነበረ ኣብ ኤርትራ ክንደይ ዓመት ዝተቐመጠ ካብኡ ሓሊፉ እውን ናይ ኢትዮጵያ ዜግነት ዘይብሉ ሰብኣይ እንታይ ዓይነት ፕላን ክዎ ከም ዝኽእል ግልጽ እዩ እዚ ትግራይ ክትጠፍእ ከም ዘለዋ እዩ ናይ መጀመርያ ዝኾነ ኮይኑ ኤኒዌይ ሕጂ ንጆሃር ምፍታሖም ንባዕሉ ዓብይ ለውጢ ከም ዘምፅእ ግልጽ እዩ ምክንያቱም ናይ ኦሮሞ ሓይልታት ሙሉእ ብሙሉእ ብዝበሃል ደረጃ ማለት እዩ እቲ ኢሊት ዝበሃል እቲ ኣብ ፖለቲካ ስልጣን ዘሎን ኢንፍሉንስ ክገብር ዝኽእልን እዚ ውግእ እዚ ይቕበሎን እዩ ወይንም ከዓነ ይድግፎን እዩ በተለይ ከዓነ ንናይ ኣምሓራ ሓይልታት ደጊፍካ ስለዚ ኣብ በባዕልቶም እቶም ብልጽግና ዝበሃሉ ዝተፈላለዩ ኢንተረስት ዘለዎም ኣብቲ ገቨርንመንትን ዓብይ ምግምማዕ ወይንም ከዓነ ፖላራይዜሽን ከም ዝፍጠር እዚ ግልጽ እዩ ህዝቢ እውን ሰምዖ ከም ዘለና ብግልጽ ኣምሓሩ ተኸዲዕና ኢና ኢሎም ተቃውሞ የልዕሉ ኣለዉ ንጆሃርን እዞም ናይ ኦሮሞ ክስታይ ከዓነ ውግእ ጠጠው ክብል ኣለዎ ኣብ ትግራይ ኣብ ቤኒሻንጉል ኣብ ኣምሓራ ኣብ ኩሉ ዝግበር ዘሎ ውግእ ጠጠው ክብል ኣለዎ ዝበሃል ኣሎ እዞም ናይ ኣምሓራ ሓይልታት ከዓነይ ብዘይ ኣብይ ኣሕመድ ፍቓድ ምስ ኢሳያስ ኦልሬዲ ናይ ባዕልቶም ኮንታክት ከም ዝመስረቱን ንኣብይ ያው ከም ዘይግዝእዎን ኢና ንርኢ ዘለና ማለት እዩ ሕጂ ከምዚ እንተኮይኑ ኣብይ ዋላት ውግእ ጠጠው ንኽብለሉ ይደሊ እዩ ምክንያቱ ብዚ ሰዓት ስልጣኑ ሒዙ ኣሎ ናይ ትግራይ ቲዲኤፍ እንድሕሪ ተንሰሒቦ ኣሎ ንስልጣኑ ዘስግኦ ነገር የለን ተዋና ፕላኑ ስልጣኑ ሒዙ ንምቕጻል እዩ ንስልጣኑ ከዓኒ ዘስግኦ ነገር ህዝቢ ስለዘየለ እቲ ሰላም ይደልዮ እየ ኢለ ዝኣምን እቲ ናይ ሰላም ስምምዕነት ይደልዮ እየ ግን እዞም ናይ ኣምሓራ ሓይልታት ከዓኒ ትውግእ ንኽቕፅል እዮም ዝደልዩ ዘሎ ከም ዝበልኩኹም ትውግእ ኣብ ናይ ትግራይ ድንበር ዋላ ጠጠው ንኽብል ኣይደልይዎን እቲ ወልቃይት ራያ ሑመራ እዚ ብምሉኡ ቦታታት ናትና እዩ ኢሎም ስለ ዝኣምኑ ዘስግእ ንዝቕፅል ግዜ ዘስግእ ሓይሊ ኣብ ትግራይ ንኽተርፍ ኣይደልዩን ሙሉእ ብምሉእ ንኸጥፍኡ ሕነ ንኽፈድዩ እዮም ዝደልዩ ዘለውና ሕጂ ካብ ኣብይ ወፂኦም እንታይ እዮም ክገብሩ ዝኽእሉ ንሳቶም ሕጂ ምስ ኢሳያስ ኮይኖም እቲ ዘሎ ውግእ ምቕፃል ማለት እዩ እስካዕ ክንደይ በዓልቶም ክኸዱ እዮም ብዘይ መሳርሒ ድጋፋት ብናይ ድሮን ክስተያት በተለይ ፌደራል መንግስቲ እንተዘይደጊፍዎም እንታይ ክኸውን ይኽእል ዝብል ብዙሕ ነገራት ኣሎ በተለይ ትማሊ ዝወፀ ብልጽግና ዲስከስ ዝገበረሎም ዶክመንት ኣሎ ኣብቲ ዶክመንት እንታይ ዝብል ዘሎ ድህረ ጦርነት ኢሎም እዮም ድህረ ጦርነት ኣንፈታት ኢሎም እዮም ዲስከስ ገይሮም እዚ ማለት ውግእ ከም ዝተወድአ ህዚ ከዓነይ መሊሳ ናብ ዝፈረሰ መሰረተ ልምዓታት ናይ ምስራሕ እንታይ ስግኣትና እንታይ እዩ ኢሎም ካብ ዘቐምጥዎ ሓደ እንታይ እዩ ኣብ ኣምሓራ ክልል ተከዳን የሚል ስመት ህዝቡ ያነሳል እንደገና ከዓነይ ተቃውሞ ክለዓል ነው ይኽእል እዩ ዝብል እዮም ገምጊሞም ዘለው እንደገና ዘስሕቕ ብጣዕሚ ኣብ ትግራይ ኣቲኻ ሕነ ናይ ምፍዳይ ዓውይ ዝኾነ ሓሳብ ስለ ዘሎ ናይ ኣምሓራ ሓይልታት ናብ ትግራይ ተኣትዮም ዓውይ ዕኖት ከምፁ ይኽእሉ እዮም ዝብል በጠቓላላይ እንትርአ እንታይ እዩ ትውግእ ከም ዝተወድአ ገይሮም እዮም ኣብቲ ዶክመንት ዝተዘራረብሉ ተዛሪቦም ዘለው እዚ ማለት ግን ብቐጥታ እውን ንሳቶም ብልጽግና በተለይ ኣብይ ዝተዛረቦ እውን ተኣምኑ ትኽእል ሰብ ኣይኮነን ምክንያቱ ከምዚ መጀመርያ ኣታሊሉ ኖቤል ፕራይስ ዝተሸለመ ህዚ እውን እቲ ኢንተርናሽናል ፕሬዠር ዘሎ ፀቕጢን ንግዚኡ ንምህዳግን ንግዚኡ ኣንፈት ንምቕያርን እምበር ብግልፂ ሰላም ዝደሊ ሰብ ኣይኮነን ምክንያቱ ሰላም ከም ዘይደሊ ብዙሕ ሚልዮን ዝኾነ መረዳእታት ኣሎ መሰረተ ልምዓት ናውደምካ ህዝቢ ሲቪልያን ናቐተልካ ዝግበር ነገር ያው ከም ትፈልጥዎ እዩ ብዝኾነ ከም ዝናይ ኖቤል ፕራይዝ ቀጥታ ወፂኦም ተዓውየ ሬስፖንሲቢሊቲ ኣብ ኣቢ ከም ዘሎ ትውግእ ጠጠው ከብሎ ከም ዘሎ ናይ ሰብኣዊ ሓገት ክኸፍት ከም ዘለዎ ቀጥታ ወፂኦም መተሓሳሰብ ምሃቦም ዓውይ ናይ ዲፕሎማሲ ዓወት እዩ ኢለ እየ ዝገምት ካብኡ ተላዒሉ እውን ያው ዓበይቲ ሽፋናት ናይ ሚድያ ሽፋናት ክረክብ እዩ ትፃወቶ ከምኡን ተቐፂሉ እቲ ናይ ዲፕሎማሲ ቃልሲ ብዙሕ ዝሕይለ ኢለ ይግምት ከም ዝበልኩኹም ነገራት ከይደጋገም ኣብ መሬት ዘሎ ነገራት እውን ዝናይ ንጆሃር ምፍትሖም ኣብቲ ውሽጢ እንታይ ክፈጥር ይኽእል እዩ ቀዳማይ ዓብይ ዝኾነ ምክፍፋል ክፍጠር እዩ ምክንያቱ ዝናይ ኦሮሚያ ሓይልታት ቀሊል ዝኾነ ተፅዕኖ የብሎምን ኦህዴድ ዝበሃል ዝናይ ኦሮሚያ ብልጽግና ዝበሃል ሙሉእ ብሙሉእ ምባል ይከኣል እዩ ብድኒ ናይ ጆሃር ናይ ፖለቲካ ረኣያ ዝዝወርን ወይንም ከዓኒ ናይ ኦነግ ኣተሓሳስባ ዝተዋሓጠን ሓይሊ እዩ ካብቲ ቀደም እውን ትውግእ እንትጅመር ደልዮምዎ ዘይኮኑስ ኣብይ ኣሕመድ ያው ስልጣኑ ንኽሕዝ ስልጣኑ ንኸጠናኸር ዝኽእለሉ ኩሉ ዓይነት ኣልያንስ ተጠቒሙ ያው ምስ ኢሳያስ ኮይኑ ናይ ክልተ ነፀላ እመን እዩ ህወሓት እዩ ንህወሓት ሒዝዎ ዘሎ ህዝቢ ከዓኒ ህዝቢ ትግራይ እዩ ህዝቢ ትግራይ ክውቃዕ ኣለዎ ብዝብል ተስማዕሚዑ ያው ሓደ ሽልማት ናይ ኖቤል ፕራይስ ረኺቡ እቲ ካልኣይ ከዓኒ ትውግእ ጀሚሩ ኣብ ህዝቢ ትግራይ ማለት እዩ ያው እቲ ካልኣይ ዝኩሉ ዕንወት ዋላ ዳ የብፃሕ እምበር ሙሉእ ብምሉእ ከም ዝሓሰቦ እቲ ህወሓት እውን ከጥፍአ ይከኣለን ብዝበለፀ እንዲኦም ሰብ እቲ ኩነታት ተረዲእዎ ብምሕራን ናብቲ ቃልሲ ንክፅምበር ዓብዪ ዝኾነ ኣስተዋፅኦ ገይሩ እዩ ማለት እዩ ህዚ እውን ያው እቲ ዝኸውን ነገራት ክንርኢ ኢና ከም ዝበልኩኹም ነገራት ዞም ድሕሪ እስረኛታት ምፍታሕ ብዝመፁ ዓበይቲ ናይ ፖለቲካ ኣንፈታት ከም ዘለዉ ይፅበ ካልእ ከዓኒ እዚ ናይ ኣየር ደብዳብ ብዘይ ምቁራፅ ሕዚ እውን ይቐፅል ኣሎ ኣብ ዝተፈላለየ ናይ ትግራይ ኣከባቢታት ያው እንታይ ሳዕቤን ከምፅእ ይኽእል ዩናይትድ ኔሽንን ናይ ኣውሮፓ ሕብረት እውን ዝኩሉ መተሓሳሳብ ሂቦም ያው ዝሰምዖም የለን ልክዕ ጆ ባይደን ምስ ደወለሉ እዩ ብድሕሪኡ እዩ እዚ ናይ ድሮን ጥቃዓታት እውን ዝፍፀም ዘሎ ብርግፅ ኣብይ ኣሕመድ እዩ ዝእዞ ዘሎ ወይንስ ናይ ኢሳያስን ዞም ናይ ኣምሓራ ሓይልታት እዮም ዘብልዎ ዘሎ ምክንያቱም ኣብ ዓፋር እዩ ዘሎ እዚ ናይ ድሮን ዝበሃል ዘሎ ብርግፅ ምስ ህዝኒ ናይ ፖለቲካ ካይዳ ናይ ኣብይ ናይ ምውሳን ዓቕሚ ብጣዕሚ ዝነኣሰ እዩ ኢለ ዝኣምን ከም ዝበልኩም ብዝተዛረብዎ ምክንያታት ብዝኾነ እቲ ዝመፅእ ኩነታት እናተኸታተልና ክነቐርብ ኢና ናይ ሎማዓንቲ ብዙያ ኣኽለና ከምቲ ዝበልኩኹም እቲ ኣብቲ ናይ ኣልጀዚራ ዘለዎ ናይ ኢንሳይድ ስቶሪ ሪኮመንድ ይገብረኩም ረእይዋ ምልእቲ ማለት እዩ ኣብዚ ያው ከርእየኩም ኣይክእልን ሙሉእ ንእሽተይ ነዋሕ ስለ ዝኾነት እታ ናይ ዓንቶ ቪድዮ ግን ያው
and bring about a more centralized form of government under Abiy Ahmed?
Well, I mean,
Returning to work!
as IT guy, I work closely with every department, so ClickUp makes it easy.
After months of building tensions between Sudan's military and civilian factions, a coup. The Prime Minister is one of many arrested. A state of emergency is